Okay, today's December 15th, 2021, and I'm trying to figure out how to say this quickly, but it's difficult for me to get this out fast. But I'm going to go as fast as I possibly can, discussing an idea that I think we should implement across the entire country. A national plan. I call it the RUBI plan, R-U-B-I, Radical Universal Basic Income. I have talked to people about this before, friends and family. I have attempted to win people over to this idea before, and there's many arguments. There's many arguments that come up to people's minds, and so I am talking about a wildly radical plan that would change the way our economic system works dramatically. However, it would be low cost, small government that would not increase taxes, or the tax increase would be negligible at most. It'd be a tiny increase at most. And it solves three big problems. So one, it implements universal basic income. It will put money into everybody's pockets, which is what Yang's plan was the whole time. But this one will operate the same way. It will behave the same way. The outcome of it will be the same, but the way that it operates will be completely different. So it will put money directly into everybody's pockets, a universal value into everybody's pockets directly, which is something left-wingers should be in support of. But in terms of selling this to right-wingers, this will also, in the same fell swoop, solve all election integrity problems. You could create a system where election results were trustworthy and secure and not corruptible, or at least if they do get corrupted, it'll be much more trackable, traceable. It'll be more transparent. So there's that. And then on the left wing, it also makes voting more accessible, and that takes care of your voter suppression issues, right? So there's that. So there's UBI and there's voting. Those are two things that this solves. But the third thing, importantly, the most important thing here, is it solves the 1971 problem. So what the fuck happened in 1971? .com. Go there. WTF happened in 1971. Go to that website. Look at this. Look at the data that's there. Or just type it in onto the internet or into YouTube and go watch a video about what happened in 1971. It is clear to me, to me it seems like whatever we're dealing with in society today is at least somewhat of a consequence of the events of 1971 or whatever happened around 1971. It seems to me that a lot of the political turmoil, a lot of the reason that the duopoly has the power that the duopoly has, a lot of the reason that our government seems so useless is because of this 1971 problem. It seems to have something to do with the Federal Reserve and the gold standard. The Federal Reserve has just been printing money, has just been materializing money into the world. They just sign a piece of paper and dollars appear. That's what happens. That's what's been happening for 50 years. So what I'm about to suggest will take power away from the Federal Reserve. So obviously, what I'm suggesting, they'll probably, it's not, we're basically fighting the biggest forces that exist here. I don't think the Federal Reserve will go down easily, but what I'm suggesting would replace the Federal Reserve. So this is a radical idea. So here's how it works. Software-based system, similar to Bitcoin, but not necessarily built the same way as Bitcoin. It's a currency. The government would implement a new currency, a new token, or coin, or credits, or units. A new thing, not dollars, specifically not dollars. A new unit. So you would create a ledger similar to Bitcoin, but this ledger would be 350 million rows big. Each row would correspond to one citizen of the United States. Each of these citizens will have a cryptographic key that could be stored on a USB or a credit card looking thing or a piece of paper or a piece of metal, however you want to do it. There's a lot of different technical implementations of this, and we can get caught up on the details of how you would implement something like this. And it's not going to necessarily be the easiest thing in the world. There's a lot of complications that come up when it comes to the physical distribution of keys to citizens, right? But what's important is that there's a 1-to-1 ratio of rows in this database to citizens in the country. And so when somebody's born, +1. When somebody dies, -1. When people become citizens, +1. When people become non-citizens, -1. Just there's a lot of implementation issues that are going to happen at this step, and I'm just going to ask you, for the sake of this video right now, for the sake of brevity at the moment, to suspend your disbelief and assume that you live in a country where everybody has a cryptographic key that corresponds to one row on a database that is run on software that is open source, meaning that anybody can look at the lines of code in the software. So this is one of the advantages of Bitcoin, and this is why I'm bringing up Bitcoin right now. Well, there's a couple reasons. First of all, blockchain-based technology like Bitcoin runs using software that every human being can see. Everybody can download it. So there's nothing secret going on. There's no shady business. This is what they mean by trustless, and well, it's not necessarily what they mean by trustless, but basically there's nothing secret happening. Everything is transparent, and this is what we should want in our government, is transparent machinery. Nobody would be able to fuck about, you know? That's what we want. We want our governmental structures to run on this kind of technology. And so I would suggest, if we were implementing this in the real world, that the administration that's in charge at the time picks somebody who's like the head of software or whatever. They create a team, but also you create independent teams that are independent of that group. And anybody can do this. You can have right-wing teams and left-wing teams. You just have to hire a couple software developers to just go through the code and make sure that it looks all right. And this is something that should be very cheap. Like, I could create the software on my computer at my house, right? This is something that, think about why there's like 10,000 cryptocurrencies currently. There's currently tens of thousands of cryptocurrencies that you can buy and trade. And it's because this is a very easy technology to implement. And it's been, if you notice, what's interesting about all these cryptocurrencies is they all have different sets of rules. So Bitcoin has a rule that's like, there's only 21 million Bitcoin. Part of what makes Bitcoin so valuable is the fact that there will never ever be more than 21 million Bitcoin, and the rules are kind of set. The rules are set. Nobody can change it. So Satoshi Nakamoto, the anonymous inventor of Bitcoin, could not change those rules. And if you have Bitcoin, Satoshi can't take them away from you. Nobody can take them away from you unless they have your cryptographic key. So largely this is going to revolve around every citizen having a key and keeping it safe. If we have that, this fixes voting issues. Now we can run a national election, and as long as all the software is, it's called the free software movement. You should look it up, Libre software. If we just develop a community of programmers that are just American programmers, right? Some of them could be directly employed by the federal government, but some of them could be in independently funded development groups that just create this software, and it shouldn't be that complicated. Like I said, it's been done tens of thousands of times. I would say that we create some sort of token that exists on the Ethereum ecosystem, and they're in this, these tokens. Okay, let me get to where the tokens come from. So this is the radical part. This is the radical part. You got this thing. It's on the Ethereum ecosystem. Everybody has access to one account on this system, right? There's 350 million accounts. Everybody has access to one of them. This is something that could be set up cheaply. It could be run for cheap. It's all code. It's all just code, right? Minus the part where you have to mail out 350 million things or whatever. I mean, that, like I said, is the hard part physically. But once you have physically solved the cryptographic key distribution, everybody will have access to this one account, which should give them access to things like national elections. Anybody with an internet access could vote in an election. So you couldn't suppress votes. People without computers, you just set up the normal ballot booth, but instead of a piece of paper that you're coloring in or whatever, you just log on using your cryptographic key, and you just vote through some sort of interface that also runs on open source code. So every step could be monitored by independent groups looking at the code. It would be very transparent. And then during the process of elections, it could be audited as it's happening and afterwards. You'd be able to make sure that there was no fuckery going on, or at least it would be easier to make sure than it currently is. And so this would solve the right-wing issue of election integrity, and it solves the voter suppression issue. And this is just a side effect of implementing a technology that starts the universal basic income. So here's how this is going to work. And here's why this beats the Federal Reserve. Here's why this is better than dollars, and this is why this is better than Bitcoin or something like that. So the way this will work is every month, you can imagine it's January 1st, 2025, day one of the Ruby plan. Here's how it works. 1,000 units, or rubies, appears inside everybody's account. And that's how it works. Every month, 1,000 units appears inside of all of these accounts simultaneously. You could set a rule where it's like 18 and older. Maybe the account has to exist for 18 years first. But either way, it'll operate the same way. And so you might be thinking, what do you mean it just appears? I'm telling you that the money appears inside the account. There's an account that only one citizen has access to because they have a unique key. 1,000 units appears inside of that account every month. Where does it come from? It comes from nowhere. The money comes from nowhere. It materializes in that account. You just write it into the code, just plus 1,000 into that account every month. This is free to implement. This just runs on code. The money comes from nowhere. That is the radical part of this. And it's a new token. I want to call them rubies, but it's just a new token. It's credits. Everybody gets 1,000 credits at the beginning of every month. It's a token that runs on this open source software, so it's all auditable. Everybody can see it. It's tax free. It doesn't cost anybody anything. Nobody has to get taxed more to implement this, and the same amount goes to everybody. So Jeff Bezos gets 1,000, and the poorest dude on the planet gets 1,000. I mean, the poorest dude in the United States gets 1,000, right? So now you're thinking, you're probably thinking, why would these be worth anything? And so here's kind of the leap you have to take here. Let's say that it's January 1st, 2025. Everybody's just gotten 1,000 of these things in their bank account, in their account there on this new technology. You can take out 1,000. You can trade them anywhere you want. You can give them to other people. You can just save them. You can do nothing with them. You could just burn them if you wanted, technically. So you're about to say they're not worth anything. So it's January 1st, you got these things, you're saying it's not worth anything. So here's what I'll say. Can I buy them from you? And what will you say? Well, they're not worth anything, so you should give them to me for free, right? Would you do that if I asked you? I want your 1,000 rubies right now. Would you send them to me? What if I gave you $1? Would you do it? They're not worth anything. I'll give you $1, you give me 1,000. Suddenly, this is where the magic happens. 1,000 rubies is now worth $1. We've now set up an exchange ratio between dollars and rubies. That's it. That's how this works. The value of that is now $1 to 1,000 credits, 1,000 units. And this will just happen instantly on day one. There will be an exchange rate that already exists. And it'll just be invented on the fly, on the spot. And you can imagine a marketplace would open up where these things could get traded back and forth, and it would be worth something in dollars. I can't tell you what it would be worth because I don't know. It's up to the market to decide. But at the beginning of every month, 1,000 new ones will appear. So what's interesting is from month 1 to month 2, the amount will double. But from month 3 to month 4, it's not a doubling anymore, right? So the amount that gets added in gets smaller in the total ratio over time. So it'll be like 1/2, 1/3, 1/4, 1/5. And then you can project forward after 12 months or after 100 months how many there will be. So that's what makes this better than dollars. Because dollars, as it stood before 1971, was attached to gold. Then, after 1971, we broke off the gold standard. Now dollars can just be materialized out of nowhere. So you have this centralized power that's just signing pieces of paper and materializing dollars. The dollars are just created through magic. And so if you can believe that that's real, then you can believe that this is real. But what's better about this is that it's inherently decentralized. The money will appear inside of the pockets of all the people. So instead of appearing it into the central authority where it gets funneled into weird, shady, untrackable stuff, instead of that untrustworthy network of tubes and tunnels, it just 1,000 of these credits just appears in the pockets of every single American every single month. And so this is good. You might think that this is going to cause a problem with inflation, right? You might think that, these are going to be losing value over time because there's going to be so many. Inflation will be ridiculous. At first, yeah, it's going to slow down over time. Like I said, after 10 months, it'll be slower. And then after 100 months, it'll be much slower than inflation rate. But what's important is that it's predictable. What's important is that this is not the Federal Reserve just signing in $4 trillion in a snap of a fingers. This is a predictable drip, and it's tied directly to the human beings in the nation. It's a national currency tied to the human bodies, the human population. So in the way that I see this is that it perfectly aligns with Andrew Yang's vision. If you actually listen to what Andrew Yang was talking about when he was running for president, you know that he talked about a humanity first perspective. To me, this is how you do it. You tie the value of this currency, the quantity of the currency, directly to the population of the United States. And you do that by just tying these accounts to every single human being. When they're born, a new account exists, and when they die, it goes away. And then every month, that account just gets 1,000 credits. And so if you're projecting forward, if you're a company or a bank, you're giving out loans, you're making complex financial decisions, you just look forward into the future, you can project where the population will be pretty accurately. I mean, with a fair degree of accuracy, you can say with confidence where the population will be in 2030, 2050. You know, people are gonna get born, they're gonna die, they're gonna come in and out. It won't be perfectly predictable, but it's more predictable than the Federal Reserve. And you can project forward pretty accurately and understand the total quantity. And this is similar to Bitcoin. Like, Bitcoin has a hard limit, right? Other cryptocurrencies have all sorts of different kinds of limits. Sometimes it's a voting-based limit. Sometimes there's different limits for different currencies. I suggest the limit for this currency is tied directly to the human beings of the country, tied to the nation. This will be a national currency. So it's radical UBI. It's UBI where money is just created in the bank accounts. That's where money comes from. Seems like magic. You might think it's not going to be worth anything, but I would suggest otherwise. What will happen is this will be tradable on traditional marketplaces. There will be a dollar to Ruby ratio, and it will be tradable on places like Coinbase, these new marketplaces opening up where there's crypto tokens. So there'll be a Bitcoin to Ruby ratio as well. So these will not be worthless. They will be worth something, right? People will be trading dollars and Bitcoin for these. They will have a value that will fluctuate wildly at the beginning, but I would suggest that eventually they will stabilize. They will stabilize at some point. Similar to how Bitcoin should theoretically stabilize at some point. It's at 60,000 right now. But, well, I think the hardest part about getting people to understand this idea is basically you have to get into this conversation of what makes something valuable. What made a Bitcoin valuable in the beginning? Like, if I was trying to convince you in 2011 to buy Bitcoin, you wouldn't have done it, right? You'd be like, this is worthless. People were constantly, I mean, you've heard the argument for a decade now. Isn't Bitcoin a scam? Why is it worth anything? It's digital money. It's just made up. It's just magic. It's like ethereal. Like, it shouldn't be worth anything. But as it stands right now, as of December 15th, 2021, making this video, one Bitcoin cost about $60,000. So, you know, 10 years ago, you could have bought a lot of Bitcoin for $60,000. So the value of these things, these credits will, I can't tell you exactly what they'll be worth in dollars because that is not up to me. It's not up to anybody. It's up to the exchange rate that will just naturally form. There'll be a market that just decides the value of these things. And it's directly tied to the human population of the United States. It's tax-free. Nobody can corrupt this. There's no way that this, you can audit the entire process. You can see the accounts. You can see all the money in all the accounts. When somebody trades 1,000 to somebody else, you'll see the 1,000 go from that person to somebody else. The whole thing will be trackable. So if there's shady business or fuckery going on, we'll be able to find out. And we can, the cool thing is that we can use the same exact platform, the same technology, the same cryptographic key technology here to implement voting solutions. You could run voting on the local level, state level. You could trade this currency outside the country. That's another thing. Anybody could buy it. It'd be there'd be an exchange rate between these credits and everything else. So really the main problem is just creating a system where everybody has this cryptographic key. Once we solve that, then we have this UBI thing, we have this voting thing, and we have a new kind of currency that is independent from any centralized authority. So the reason that this won't get implemented is because that centralized authority will fight against this. This would weaken the Federal Reserve if we were to implement something like this. It would weaken central power. It's small government. It's a small government answer, right? This should be I mean, theoretically, it's just implemented through software, most of it. Software is cheap. The expensive part is going to be keeping track of the human beings. That is really the hard part. But I would suggest that this solution, the benefits that come from setting up a system where you just simply, it's basically just a list of human beings, right? And a nation should already have a list of human beings in their borders anyway. That should already exist. It's not unreasonable to suggest that a nation should have a list of people that are inside the borders. And so this obviously runs into a lot of political dynamite, a lot of political landmines, because there's people inside the borders that aren't on any list right now. So that's an issue. And I don't have any suggestions for how to solve that. I don't know how. I mean, this would incentivize people to get on the list. Once you're on the list, you get these credits. So it also solves our underpopulation problem. You know, ironically, paradoxically, we are headed towards an issue of not enough people. And this would at least give people an incentive to create more people. There's that too. This would help. I mean, it doesn't fix a lot of the problems, but this theoretically could remove destitute poverty. You can remove, because everybody that has one of these cryptographic keys would at least have a trickle of resources into their account that can't be taken away from them. Nobody can steal it unless they get your key, but there's going to have to be some system for preventing that. It would be trackable, at least. If somebody stole your key, you would know exactly where that money went. You'd be able to follow it, and then through that, any enforcement authority would be able to track down who's using it. That's one of the advantages of this open software, some of these crypto technologies. In this video, I have sort of blended open source with crypto with blockchain. There's distinct lines between those things, and some of this technology would just simply be open source software. Some of it would have to be sort of built on the Ethereum ecosystem or a similar ecosystem. There would have to be a token that gets traded. A lot of the details are, I mean, there are people smarter than me at figuring this stuff out, but the way I see it is that this can provide interesting solutions. Easy to implement, arguably. Like, if there's anything that a government should be able to implement, it's this, right? It's relatively simple compared to some other solutions people are thinking about. And it gives money to everybody. It would remove absolute poverty, because you would always have these tokens every month. They would just appear, and they might become worth a lot. I would suggest that they would become worth quite a bit. I don't know how quickly. The price will fluctuate rapidly, I imagine, in the beginning. But they wouldn't be worth zero. They'd be worth more than nothing. That's important to think about. And there's a limited supply, technically, or it's not necessarily a hard limit, but the limit will be easy to understand going forward, easy to predict. So you can kind of imagine it's like a limit. It's a time-based limit, because it's still a number of human beings. It's a function of time and population of United States. So, and you can project that forward pretty accurately. And it's a humanity first vision. That's the way I see it. It's like quite literally a person first answer. Puts the money directly into the pockets of the people. And it doesn't increase taxes for everybody. So we don't even have to talk about taxes. Don't even have to talk about it. It's not taxed. This money, you can exchange it for dollars if you want. It's a currency. It's an asset. And this little faucet would exist. Everybody would have like a faucet in their pocket, a faucet in their bank account that's basically an eternal asset that can't be taken away from you. It's inextricably tied to you no matter where you go. As long as you're a citizen of the country, we can make some rules about maybe you got to be 18 first, maybe if you leave the country for too long, you don't get it. But I would want people to see this as an American birthright. It's like a right of citizenship. And you just have it in your pocket all the time, always giving you 1,000 of these things. And there will be a marketplace to trade these things at any time to anybody you want, for anything you want. So you can buy anything you want with it. And you can trade it for anything. And yeah, it's tough for me to explain why it would be valuable, but this conversation of me explaining why it would be valuable is going to sound exactly like me trying to explain why Bitcoin is valuable. It's valuable because it's valuable. That's really what it is. It's valuable because somebody will buy it from me. And it's worth more when people buy it more. And it's worth less when people buy it less. And I will bet you money that people are going to buy these things, because I'm going to do it. On January 1st, 2025, on day one, when people have these things and they think they're worthless, I'm going to buy them up. That's what I'll do. I'll trade people a penny for 1,000. If they really think it's worthless, here's a penny. Give me 1,000. So, and I imagine pretty quickly I won't be the only one doing that. So there will quickly I don't know what it's going to look like in the beginning. And maybe somebody who is better at economics understands this stuff, but the way that I see it is there will be a value that will be figured out pretty quickly. So you might have to make some rules about betting future earnings. Like, you could end up in some sort of indentured servitude position where somebody says, I'll give you 5 months. Like, there needs to be a law that says you can't pay with future, some limit on being able to pay with future income from this thing, because that might become legally tricky there. But there's a lot of little issues that are going to come up with this, and I think if you can sort of just get behind the entire vision, it will solve so many problems in our country, because we can run our government so much more efficiently if we do this. You can imagine if we had this kind of open source software type setup, and if we, just to add a layer of complexity onto this, you can imagine some sort of tax system that would be open source like this, where you actually get to decide through like a web interface, through some sort of user interface, you could decide where your taxes go, or a portion of your taxes. So imagine, right, because right now the way it works is the government takes your money and then it goes to who knows where. It goes to wherever the government wants it to go. What if there were options? What if you could pull a lever and it would go to one thing versus another thing? This could change the way we do public funding. You could either change the way where your taxes go, or you could just commit some percentage of your monthly credits that come in. You could say, okay, 1% of these credits are going to go to some publicly funded thing, and then you can just pull the levers on where that goes, or you can keep all of it. I like to think that this would change the way people see publicly funded things. I like to think this would change the way people see charity. And what's cool about it is there's no stigma. So it goes to the poorest people, it goes to Jeff Bezos, it goes to everybody. There's no race or gender or requirement it's just a universal thing. It treats everybody perfectly equal. It's like a perfectly liberal solution, right? Because everybody's equal, everybody's the same. Everybody gets the same value in their pocket. When I get 1,000, it's not worth anything different than your 1,000. I can do something wildly different with my 1,000. You can save yours. You could just save it for 10 years. You could just never touch it. It'll just stack up in your account. Or you can spend it on drugs. Either way, it's up to you. So that's what makes it kind of a right-wing thing. It's very libertarian, but now I'm just kind of defending universal basic income. So I think I got across everything I wanted to say. This is where money should come from. We should change our economic system radically. It would make dollars almost less relevant, or it would make the Federal Reserve less relevant, because there'd just be a new currency. I mean, it's kind of hard to get your brain into the right spot to think about it, but you can almost imagine, instead of seeing the world from a perspective of dollars, put your brain where you're seeing the world from a perspective of all currencies added together. What's the exchange rate between dollars and Bitcoin, for example? And why are we using dollars when dollars are controlled by this mysterious federal entity that gets to produce dollars whenever it wants for some reason? Or somehow, I think everybody agrees that our government has just, the ability to snap your fingers and create trillions of dollars cannot be a good thing, right? There's a reason that the gold standard was, this WTF happened in 1971.com. Really, something happened. Something dramatic happened right there. And I do think that we need something equally as dramatic to just steer us back into a more reasonable direction. I think a lot of the politics, a lot of the turmoil today, a lot of the problems today, like I've said in past videos, every human being has an urge for positive growth. We all do. And when a group of people doesn't have that positive growth, they become a political tool, because now they're looking around for solutions, and then politicians come up and present solutions. So we have a lot of politicians presenting a lot of solutions to a lot of problems. People are casting about looking for answers to problems, because I think a lot of people are left in a dissatisfied state right now, because positive growth is not happening. My generation is not doing better than the previous generation, which is breaking our minds. We want the next generation to be doing better, always. And something happened in 1971, and you just got to look it up, and you got to think about how the thing I'm suggesting, will put us onto a better course. It will create value. It's because it solves our need for, we have this need for more, this need for positive growth. And so maybe we just need to artificially create that. And that's why you know, you really get into the stuff of like these every company needs to make more and more profit. Every human being as an individual needs more and more. So maybe just tie our currency directly to the human body. Just when there's a body, that's where the currency materializes. It appears at the point of the human body rather than anywhere else, right? Bitcoin has this magical limit. For Bitcoin, it appears in the accounts of the people that made it, that mined it. For dollars, it appears in the Federal Reserve, and then it just distributes from there. So with this new currency, it would just appear in the accounts of, you know, the unique accounts of 350 million people. And that's where money would come from. That's just where money will come from then on, every month for the rest of time. So, and you know, you can use these things to, this would be, as Yang would call it, the trickle up economy. Because this would immediately, if these things were worth any amount of money at all, every community in the country would suddenly be getting money directly injected into their bank accounts. The money would just appear inside the community already. You don't need to distribute it. It's already distributed. It's like a distributed, decentralized way of giving people resources directly, and it creates the resources out of nowhere. It's like magic. And it works because it works. It works, it will be valuable because it'll be valuable, which is the thing that I think that the people have to make that leap past. You have to understand that dollars are just made up. Bitcoin are just made up. Money is just made up. It's always in your mind. It's never been anywhere else. It never was. So gold is only worth stuff because gold is worth stuff. Like if I have a block of gold, it doesn't do me anything other than making like conductors and jewelry, but it doesn't do anything. It's only worth something because you imagine it's worth something. Like if I'm holding it and you'll give me $1,000 for it, it's now worth $1,000. But if a guy over there will give me $10,000, it's now worth $10,000. A thing is worth what it's worth. That's just, there's some sort of like human psychology thing going on where we just attribute value onto things. It's a way of processing information across the system. I mean, you get into these crazy subjects where we talk about economics on like really a free market is just valuing everything constantly. Like it's doing something that a centralized authority could not do. So we might as well just, to me, this solution just kind of fits in with everything. It would be a perspective shift for sure. And, you know, in my vision of the future, dollars would sort of just, on January 1st, 2025, a dollar would still be worth $1. Like it wouldn't change the value of dollars, right? So it would just create a new currency, a second currency, and it would be a national currency. It'd still be an American currency. You could call it credits or units or rubies or whatever you want to call it. It doesn't really matter. It's just vocab. It's just semantics. A Bitcoin is just a made up word too, right? So just create a new currency, tie it to American citizens. And that's my idea. That's my idea. And if we have this, we've already solved voting at the same time. Same platform solves voting. We could fix this election nonsense. People could trust it. You could audit the election easily. It would be, you know, it's a radical plan, and I'm just a guy with 43 subscribers on a YouTube channel where I walk around in the woods and talk about nonsense. So maybe this is, you know, I don't expect anybody to get up and do anything about this right now. I'm just sort of putting the idea out there. I haven't heard anybody else fully line all these things up before. Maybe somebody else has. I don't have awareness of everything. I'm sure somebody in the crypto community has talked about national currencies before. Somebody must have thought of this before. I can't be the first person to think about this, right? The reason I thought about this is because I got into Andrew Yang, and he was talking about $1,000 to everybody's bank account every month. But to do that, you have to tax people or you have to print dollars. And so you're left in this position where you either have to increase taxes substantially, which makes it a hard sell, or you have to print money and put it into people's bank accounts. And you could make the argument that why not just put $1,000 into everybody's bank account every month? And I would say that I think it's better to do a new currency, because then you can have a dollar to ruby exchange ratio. And that ratio would be found naturally. So, and it might just be very low for a while, but I imagine it will become valuable very quickly. It would be an interesting experiment at the very least. We could just turn it on and maybe they will never be worth a whole lot, but it doesn't cost us a whole lot either. I mean, the expensive part is the cryptographic keys, but this is a low cost, low risk solution. You just create it. It won't have any terrible consequences necessarily. If we just turn it on and it just never is worth anything. Maybe people laugh at it, think it's a joke. It'll just, whatever, it'll just be there. They'll still be piling up in these accounts. You could just run it for very cheap. Compared to the other government solutions people are offering, this is a very cheap solution. Very cheap. It doesn't, you know, it's creating money out of thin air, and it's doing it using software. Software's cheap. So, and it's this, the technology for this, there's already 10,000 cryptocurrencies out there, and you could copy one of their structures. You can create all sorts of independent programmer communities. Just hire a couple software developers. You could set up independent organizations to do this, federal organizations. There's going to have to be some relationship to the federal government, because there's going to have to be some sort of way of keeping track of the people. Which, like I said, that's the hard part, really, having a list. But really, every nation should have a list. So anyway, I've talked for 35 minutes. I should stop. I'm just going in loops now. I don't know how to make this clear to people. I think people are going to think I'm insane. I know what many of the counter arguments are. I've had this conversation many times. I'm mainly just throwing this out there just to have it written down or have it saved somewhere that on December 15th, 2021, this was my plan. So there it is. That's about it. Bye.